Here we go. Okay. So, so good afternoon, all, and for the next for today and the next 2 weeks, I want to spend the time talking about different aspects of Passover. We'll talk about why that is, why we're going to spend three weeks talking about different aspects of Passover. But then 2 weeks after that, March 29th is the second day of Passover. It's Yontiv, so we will not have class on March 29th. And April 5th would be the Monday after that, is the day after Passover, but it also happens to be my wife's birthday. So we're going to take off from class then as well. She is off from work that day. So there's a possibility if the cherry blossoms are still in bloom, because they said peak is April 1st. If the cherry blossoms are still on the trees, maybe for her birthday we'll go down there, but don't tell anybody, even though we're recording this, right? It's not a secret in the internet world anymore. Okay, so this is what I wanted to do today, to provide some background on Passover and get into some of the nitty-gritty. We'll talk more about the nitty-gritty next time, especially. And then 2 weeks from today, we'll talk about the Seder and talk about all the parts of the Seder and different traditions around the Seder. So I hope that plan is okay with all of you. Passover, this coming Shabbat, by the way, is, we conclude the reading of the book of Exodus with the double portion, Vayakel and Pekudei. But it would also be a Shabbat that we take out a second Torah from the Ark, which is interesting. You know, Jules and I were talking before everybody else came on about things that pop into your head while somebody's teaching. And I say, I never know what's going to pop into my head when I'm talking. And so something just popped into my head. The CDC just came out with its latest guidelines that said that if people who are fully vaccinated, that is 2 weeks after your second vaccine, can be around each other indoors without masks on. So I kind of figured that that would be the case, and our, trust me, our reopening committee will meet after Passover to figure out how that CDC guideline is now going to impact us coming back together in the synagogue, and how, when recommendations of when we'll start easing people back into the building, et cetera, et cetera. So just know that this is, it is definitely in our radar and something that we want to, something that we are looking forward to doing. So this Shabbat, we're reading the last two portions of the book of Exodus, Vayakel and Pekudei, and we would take out a second Torah from the Ark to read a special Maftir portion, because it's the last of the special Shabbatot before Passover, in which we take a second scroll out of the Ark. There's one more special Haftarah, and that's the Shabbat right before Passover itself, which will happen on the day of the Seder, Saturday night. March 27th is the first Seder. That morning is a regular Shabbat. We will, that Haftarah is called Shabbat Hagadol, the great Shabbat. This Shabbat is called Shabbat HaChodesh, Shabbat of the month, because it's it's always the Shabbat before the new month of Nisan, the month in which Passover is celebrated. And we read from Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 to 20, the plans for the first Passover celebration in Egypt, which becomes the basis for the Passover celebration for all time. So we're told, if you want to follow along, if you have a Chumash with you, you can follow along as I kind of highlight for us what the Chumash, what the Torah says about Passover, and how that impacts our observances today. So if you wanted to follow along, It's Exodus chapter 12, verse 1, which in the Eitz Chaim is on page 380. Or whatever edition of Chumash or Torah you're using, you want to look for Exodus chapter 12, which is within the portion Bo. Okay, so God says to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this is right before the 10th plague happens. Okay, this month, that's where we get the name of this Shabbat, HaChodesh Hazeh, the first two words of the second verse in Hebrew, HaChodesh, so that's why Shabbat is called HaChodesh. This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. All right, so just a tangent. This is not to do with Passover, but according to the Torah, the month of Nisan is the new year. It's the first month of the year. So scholars think that it is based on the agricultural cycle, and that it makes sense to start the year when things are starting to bloom again. So outside my front door, there are some green things poking their heads up out of the ground. No flowers yet, but the stems of the flowers, the daffodils and the crocuses, are peeking their heads up. So, wherever we are here in the greater Olney area, we see some green starting to perk up. So this is an ancient idea that when green starts appearing again after the brown and dead of winter, then that's a sign for new life. And new life means new beginning, new year. So it makes sense agriculturally that this month would be the beginning of the year. So that's how the new year was always celebrated. It was only in the time of the rabbis. So the Torah is about 3,000 years ago. The time of the rabbis, about 2,000 years ago, 1,800 years ago, that they shifted from Nisan to Tishrei, so that Rosh Hashanah, as a holiday, was created by the rabbis to celebrate this new understanding of the new year, and that it's not based on the agricultural season, because there are many Jews already in the time of the rabbis who are no longer farmers. So it didn't really make personal sense anymore to make the new year based on the farming season when most Jews were no longer farmers. So New Year then took on a spiritual perspective and a religious perspective. So, but here we have in the Torah the affirmation of why the new year began in the month of Nisan. And then later in the Torah too, when in the book of Leviticus, it lists for us the holidays that are the sacred occasions celebrated throughout the year. It begins with Passover. It doesn't begin with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which would make sense to us today. And then what is Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the 7th month. Okay, so we'll get to that again later on in the year when we start talking about Rosh Hashanah in this class. But that's just the tangent, so that we just know for the Torah that the new year began in Nisan. So speak to the whole community of Israel. So we're looking at chapter 12 of Exodus. Speak to the whole community of Israel. Say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby. In proportion to the number of persons, you shall contribute for the lamb, according to what each household will eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day. Okay, well, let's stop here for a second. Here is one major aspect of the celebration of Passover, which we don't do anymore. And that is that on the 10th day of the month of Nisan, if the temple were still standing in Jerusalem, we all, instead of running around to 7 Mile Market or to Shalom's or to Moti's or whatever kosher market is where you live, to start scrounging for kosher for Passover food. Instead, in addition, we would be scrounging for a sheep or a goat, a year-old sheep or goat, because then we would bring that sheep or goat to Jerusalem to have it slaughtered on the eve of Passover, the night that we have the Seder. We'll get to that in a second. That afternoon, that's when the Passover lamb or goat would be slaughtered in the temple in Jerusalem. Now, we don't do that anymore, of course, since the temple was destroyed. And the only remnant of this Passover is the shank bone that's on the Seder plate. Okay? And there are some who say we should not eat lamb as our meal for Passover Seder, because we're in mourning for the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And why should we eat lamb today? The lamb that we should be eating on Passover should be the Passover sacrifice. And since we can't do the Passover sacrifice, since the temple is destroyed, we shouldn't be eating lamb. That's one opinion. And I know that there are other opinions where there are segments of the Jewish community that do eat lamb on Passover Seder to remember this Passover sacrifice. But most Ashkenazim do not. Those Jews descended from Central and Eastern Europe do not eat lamb on Passover as a reminder that the temple isn't standing anymore. And we have the shank bone on the Seder plate as a reminder of this. Those of us who have been reading along with the Daf Yomi, the page of Talmud a day, just so happens that we're in the tractate of Passover, Pesachim it's called in the Talmud, and a couple of weeks ago had many pages talking about this very law and how it was to be fulfilled in Jerusalem at the time of the temple, and how it was fulfilled, what people would do, this whole idea of if you can't afford a lamb yourself. Now, those of us who shop at Costco, if you've ever been to the Costco in Wheaton, you can buy a halal lamb. Just look in the frozen halal section, which happens to be next to the frozen kosher section in the Costco in Wheaton, and look in there, you'll see a whole lamb right there in the freezer. So now, it's only by looking at the freezer in Costco that you can get a sense of how big a lamb is and why you'd want to go in with another family or several other families, because you got to eat the whole lamb at Passover Eve. And there's no way that one person or two people, husband and wife, could eat a whole lamb on Passover night. So you'd share in the whole lamb, lamb or goat, with friends and neighbors. And you'd all agree that this is what it is. And you'd make sure from the 10th, in the 10th of the month, you want to make sure that that lamb or goat is without blemish. You can't offer anything as a sacrifice when it has a blemish. And the rabbis describe what is a blemish, that is, what constitutes a blemish, and what marks on an animal are okay and not considered a blemish, and what marks are considered a blemish. So that the rabbis discuss that. But you want to make sure that your lamb or goat that you buy and designate as the Passover sacrifice then stays without blemish from the 10th of the month until the 14th, because it's the 14th in the afternoon when the Passover sacrifice was offered. And there were shifts in the temple in Jerusalem, 3 shifts. And it describes then what's the best kind of person who's offering the sacrifice. Is it the person who tries to get in for the first shift, or for the second shift, or for the third shift, right? Is the procrastinator okay in waiting to the last minute to get in on the third shift sacrifices. Again, that's something else that the Talmud describes. But all of that is from these couple of sentences here of getting a lamb or a goat, a 1-year-old lamb or goat, that would then be shared among families for the offering in, here in Egypt, but then becomes the law for all time. Okay, so that's aspect number one of the observance of Passover lamb, which we don't do anymore. You, verse 6, you shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, and all the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. Okay, so this is in Egypt. So the Israelites themselves, this is before there's an institution of Kohanim, before there is a Mishkan. In Egypt themselves, they are doing this themselves. Later, it becomes the Kohanim who do the actual slaughtering and the Israelites who are doing the eating. Okay? They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat it. They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it. Okay, so the entire lamb has to be, first it has to be eaten roasted. Okay, so in other words, think of a barbecue, because that's exactly what would be done. It would be roasted over the fire of the altar. And everybody has to eat it that night. You can't save it for, so I'm just thinking of a Jewish mother would pack up things in Tupperware and send it home with you after having dinner, right? Can't do that with the Passover lamb. You have to eat it all that night. And that's what you want to make sure, that you're in with enough families so that the entire lamb or goat is consumed that night. The Talmud also talks about, what are the best parts of the animal that people would really like to have and to eat. So you're supposed to eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread. Okay, so that's verse 8. V'achlu et habasar, you consume the flesh, b'layla hazeh, on this night, sli eish, so roasted over fire, umatzot, matzah, al merorim, on bitter herbs, yochluhu, you shall eat it. Okay, so there's the sense of why we have to have matzah on Passover. Right here, we eat it with matzah. The matzah later on in chapter 13, 14, it tells us they ate matzah because they didn't have time for the bread to rise. They're quick out of Egypt, so that's the reason for the matzah. And the bitter herbs. There's no reason given for the bitter herbs here. We know that the reason for bitter herbs is to remind us of the bitterness of slavery, of the slavery experience in Egypt for our ancestors, right? So now, how we remember this during the Seder in a couple of places. First, a few places. So first, it's on the Seder plate. You got the bitter herbs on the Seder plate, and you have the Passover. You have the shank bone on the Seder plate, right? And you have matzah, 3 matzahs in a pile, in a stack, on the table as well. So all of those symbols are there on the table. Then you also are supposed to eat the bitter herbs during the course of the Seder. First, during the Seder, we point to the Passover, to the shank bone, we point to the matzah, we point to the maror, and say a paragraph about the symbolism of these 3 things, because the 3 are listed together here. And then Hillel says, right, so the parts of the Seder, which again, we'll get to in a couple of weeks, but there's korech, that part of the Seder, after maror, korech, shulchan, orech. So maror, you eat the bitter herbs. Korech, you eat the Hillel sandwich. And the Hillel sandwich is the charoset, taking the place of the Passover lamb or goat. You have the charoset with maror in between 2 pieces of matzah. fulfilling this commandment as a substitute. Al matzot umerorim yochlu. Okay, so this chapter, we'll keep on going, is serving as the basis for how we observe Passover today. Okay, so you should not leave any. Verse 11, this is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Lord. Now, this is not how we conduct the Seder today, unless you're part of some segments of the Sephardic Jewish community where the tradition is to dress up as if you're going on a trip. And depending on the Haggadah you use, it will tell you in the commentary that there are some segments of the community that actually dress this way, with sandals on, a walking stick in their hand, and that's how they're conducting the Seder, to relive the experience here of the experience of the Exodus in Egypt. So, like I said, it's only a few communities of the greater Jewish community that dress like this, but there's that idea to maintain this connection with the Torah verses here. For that night, I will go through the land of Egypt, strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt, I the Lord. And the blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Firstborn Egyptians, so this is a precursor, a warning to be protected from the last plague, the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. You have the blood of this lamb or goat spread on your doorpost, then you are protected from the plague. And this is also remembered today with the fast of the firstborn. That is always the day of the Seder, except this year. Okay, so this year, Passover begins on a Saturday night, which adds a few complications, which I think I will have time to get to in a little bit. But one aspect is it means that we have an extra day of Passover, essentially. Passover begins Saturday night, but you can't do the preparations of the last minute preparations on Shabbat. You have to do it on Friday before Shabbat starts, which means then you have an extra day of Passover. Well, an extra, that's not technically Passover, but an extra day of being kosher for Passover. Now, I know I'm looking at the screen, and I know that many among us on this screen are already, our houses will be kosher for Passover. They always are every year, a few days before Passover anyway. But you know that depending on your level of kashrut, you could go out or order and pick up some chametz and still eat it somewhere or at a place in your house that you would designate as your chametz zone that you would then clean up later after you're done eating. You can't do that on Shabbat. Well, technically you can't do that on Shabbat. I can't tell you what to do, but that isn't an option for traditionally observant Jews to get some chametz on Shabbat and eat it the day of the Seder, which we normally can. We can eat chametz until 10 o'clock in the morning. We have to be rid of the chametz by 9, but you can eat it until 10 o'clock in the morning. Can't do that on Shabbat. So it means an extra day of Passover observance. What also impacts is the fast of the firstborn. The rabbis say that the firstborn should fast as a reminder of how firstborn Egyptians had to die in the 10th plague for us to be free. So as a sign of gratitude to God and extra spiritual sensibility, firstborn is tradition for them to fast. Now, the rabbis say, since the rabbis made that up, it doesn't say here that in the Torah portion here, it doesn't say firstborn should fast in order to remember the 10th plague. Now, the Torah doesn't say that, the rabbis say that. So because it's rabbinic and not Torah in origin, I mean, it's based on the Torah that there is a 10th plague and firstborn were died in the 10th plague. Based on that, the rabbis created this custom of fasting the day of the Seder. So the rabbi said, since the rabbis created that custom, it's considered a minor fast. A minor fast means sunrise to sunset, as opposed to a major fast, which would be sunset till nightfall the next day. So a major fast, Yom Kippur, is a major fast, is a 25-hour fast, sunset until nightfall the next day. Okay, whereas a minor fast, like the fast of the Firstborn, or the fast of Esther, or the 17th of Tammuz, or the 10th of Tevet, or the fast of Gedalia, all of those are minor fast days, sunrise till sunset. So that's one thing, a minor fast day. And minor fast days cannot happen, no fast day except for Yom Kippur can happen on Shabbat. Any fast day, any other fast day that would fall on Shabbat would be postponed. So Tisha B'Av, for example, the 9th day of Av, often the 9th of Av falls on Shabbat, but it is observed Saturday night and Sunday, the 10th of Av. A fast day like this, the fast of the Firstborn, is pushed back, so it's not postponed. You can't. It doesn't make sense to do the fast of the Firstborn during Passover. Doesn't make sense to do it after Passover. Makes sense to do it before Passover. So you can't do it on Friday because the rabbis say you shouldn't have a fast day leading into Shabbat. So the fast of the Firstborn happens on Thursday this year. So when Passover begins on Saturday night, fast of the Firstborn happens on Thursday before. So this year, March 27th is Saturday for the first Seder that night. So that means Thursday, March 25th would be the fast of the Firstborn. That also means that night we search for chametz. You need to search for the chametz when it's with a candle. You have to look. It's, first of all, searching is work. Technically speaking, it's work, collecting the crumbs that you set aside for the search, and you're searching by the light of a candle. So searching is work. Lighting a candle is work. Two things that you can't do on Shabbat. So you can't do it on Friday night because it's Shabbat already. You can't light a fire on Shabbat. You can't do the work, in air quotes, of looking for chametz. So you look for the chametz Thursday night. Okay. I'll get to another aspect of the impact of starting on Saturday night in a little bit. I might have time today. If not, I will do it next week. I want to just finish up with what it says here in so we're on verse 14 on page 383 in Eitz Chaim. And we're only going up to verse 20 because this is what this Shabbat's special Torah reading has for us. And this is all the preparation for Passover. This day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord throughout the ages. Okay, so this idea here, because it says it in verse 14, what happened here in Egypt happens forever because it says it right here. It says throughout the ages, lidorotechem, for your generations ad infinitum, essentially is what lidorotechem. Lidorotechem chutkat olam techagulu. It is an eternal ordinance that should be, or institution for all time. So we're now verse 15 is going to make this complicated. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whosoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. Now, what we had until verse 14 is the preparation for the 10th plague. You slaughter this lamb or goat, use the blood to spread it over your doorpost, roast it then, and then eat it that night, dressed, ready to leave Egypt. And now the question is, what's this idea of 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread? Now, if this was a biblical scholarship class, we'd ask this question: what does this have to do with the rest of the story? All I'll say is that it's possible an editor came along and said, wait, if this is the Passover that's being described here, we observe Passover as a 7-day holiday. In Israel, it's 7 days. Outside of Israel, it's 8 days. We observe Passover as a 7 or 8 day holiday. How come the Torah isn't telling us about a 7 or 8 day holiday? Why is it only telling us about the Passover sacrifice? So I'm suggesting that an editor came along and combined the 8-day, 7-day holiday that we know as Passover with this one day that happened in Egypt into the full holiday that we know. Okay? So, because what happened in Egypt was they did the protection of their homes. They slaughtered the lamb, they ate the lamb, they were dressed, ready to go. Moses said, hey, time to go. At midnight, he said around midnight, later in the Torah it says, he says to all the Israelites, now get up, let's go. God says we have to go. So that's what the first Passover was. They didn't have bread, enough time for the bread to rise, so they had matzah to eat on their way. So the first Passover was not a 7-day holiday. The first Passover in Egypt was a 1-day holiday. But if it says here it's going to be for all time means it has to be a 7-day holiday or an 8-day holiday as we know it. So the rest of the days of the holiday we don't eat the Passover lamb for 8 days. We eat matzah for the rest of the time. Okay? So if you're catching what I'm saying here, here we have a conflation of what happened in Egypt, which was a 1-day event, to the holiday as we know it, which is a 7-day event in Israel, 8-day event outside of Israel. 8-day holiday that is added onto the 1 day that Passover occurred, the Exodus from Egypt occurred. Okay, so the rest of the holiday is you shall eat unleavened bread. The very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. Okay, so let me just, you shall celebrate a sacred occasion on the first day, a sacred occasion on the 7th day, right? First days of Yom Tov, last days of the holiday are Yom Tov, right, with intermediate days in between. No work at all shall be done on them. Only what every person is to eat, that alone may be prepared for you. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. That's the holiday of matzah. The holiday of matzah is what the rest of the holiday is called. The first day, from what's described here, is called Passover. Okay? On this day, I brought you your ranks out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe this day throughout the ages as an institution for all time. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. No leaven shall be found in your houses for 7 days. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the community of Israel, whether he is a stranger or a citizen of the country. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your settlements. You shall eat unleavened bread. Okay, so this from verse 15 through 20 then is essentially what the holiday of Passover is all about, and how this year, when it begins on a Saturday night, it gets a little bit more complicated. So we all know that we're supposed to get rid of our chametz before Passover. Any food that has any leavening in it. The rabbis understood that to mean anything derived from 5 grains. 5 grains: wheat, barley, oat, rye, and spelt. Those are the 5 grains that the rabbis say that from that you can make bread, from that it can be leavened, and that equals chametz. Only those 5 grains: wheat, barley, rye, oat, and spelt. You can make matzah from those 5 grains, special matzah for Passover. So those grains that you're going to use to make matzah, that flour has to be watched to make sure it doesn't get wet beforehand, because if you add water to the flour, the process of leavening begins. So the rabbis say you make matzah from those 5 grains only, right? Corn is not included. Rice is not included in this, okay? Which is why, according to Sephardic tradition, you can eat corn and rice and beans on Passover. The Ashkenazi rabbis say corn, rice, and beans look like these 5 grains. Even though they aren't those 5 grains, they look like them when you cook them. And therefore, to be safe, don't eat those. So thanks to the Ashkenazi rabbis of the early Middle Ages, we do not eat corn, rice, and beans on Passover. Corn, rice, and beans are called kitniot, that whole category. Technically, it's legumes, but you can add corn and rice to that category of food that Sephardim eat on Passover, but Ashkenazim don't. So you have to get rid of anything made of those 5 grains before Passover. You have to search your house for it this year on Thursday night and eradicate it in a formula, either burning the chametz, which I will do on Friday morning. You can do as well safely in your own homes or in your backyards, and recite a formula saying that I've done my best getting rid of the chametz, and anything that is found in my home is like the dust of the earth. And the rabbis say, in order to save us a little bit of money, we can sell, in air quotes, any chametz that's left in our home to somebody not Jewish, and then it's technically not in our possession anymore. It says here that it shall not be in your possession. And so if you don't own it, it's not in your possession. So that gets to the idea of selling our chametz to somebody not Jewish. So therefore, in the shofar, in the newsletter, and starting hopefully this coming week in the weekly daf, you will see the PDF of the Sell Your Chametz form, which you will use me as your agent to sell a chametz, and I will sell everybody's chametz in our community to our custodian, who is not Jewish, on condition that we can buy it back when Passover is over. Thanks to Rabbi Hillel and the rabbis of the Mishnah for creating this loophole that allows us to keep chametz in our houses, technically not in our possession. So that's point number 1 about selling chametz. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, just unmute yourself or write in the chat. The other thing is, we are now, when Passover begins on Saturday night. So I said before that it means that we have an extra day of Passover observance and Passover kashrut observance. The issue is that there are some who say that eating challah on Shabbat is a mitzvah, an important mitzvah that should not go, that cannot be ignored, and there is no substitute for it. So within the Orthodox world, there is this practice of still eating challah, right? I just said we burn the chametz on Friday morning. So, and we're saying a formula that any chametz in our possession is not in our possession anymore. So how is it possible if we've searched the home of chametz, we've gotten rid of chametz, our houses are perfectly clean, how are we allowed to eat challah on Friday night and Shabbat morning? Apparently, it's a mitzvah, not apparently, it is a mitzvah to eat challah for 2 of the 3 meals that we're supposed to eat on Shabbat, right? We know of the concept of shalosh sudas, or Su'udah Shlishit, the third meal on Shabbat before Shabbat is over. So that's the third meal. So that obviously there are two more: Friday night dinner, Shabbat lunch, Shabbat evening, leading into Saturday night. Those are the three meals, and two of them you have to have challah for. So the question arises: how can you have challah if your house is clean already? So those who claim, right. So yes, as somebody has written privately in the chat, yes, you can designate a separate area in your house where you keep that chametz there. The problem is you're supposed to eat your entire meal in the same place. For those who are traditional enough, who are claiming that you have to have challah for your Shabbat dinner and your Shabbat lunch, they would also claim that you can't have an appetizer in one room and the main course in another room. You have to eat all together at the very same place. There are discussions in the Talmud about this. If you started your meal in one place and go to somebody else's house for dessert, does that still count as the same meal or not? And most rabbis agree, no. You should say Birkat HaMazon, the grace after meals, when you get up from your place in the one house before going to somebody else's house or some other place for another part of the meal. So the problem with designating like your laundry room or your basement to keep the challah is a problem unless you're going to eat all of Shabbos meal in that room. And who wants to eat dinner in a laundry room or eat dinner in a basement? Right now, some basements could be nice, but laundry rooms, even laundry rooms can be nice, but usually laundry rooms aren't big enough for your whole family to be eating challah. So the conservative movement, 20 some odd years ago, no, my math is wrong. No, that's right. Yeah. It's 1993. So how many years ago is that? 28 years, right? Not 18, 28 years. We're in 2021. Yes, 1993, Rabbi Cass Abelson, wrote a teshuva about what you do when Passover is on a Saturday night. And he said, based on the ultra-Orthodox Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who said, you can, now, the one option that comes to mind is matzah. You can say, so the idea is you have to say hamotzi. The idea of having challah for Shabbos dinner and Shabbos lunch is that you need to say hamotzi with your meal. You have to have a full meal. And for the very traditional and understanding of a full meal is a meal that you say hamotzi for. Anything that's not made from flour and water, any additional ingredients makes it invalid for saying hamotzi. You would say a different blessing, but hamotzi is anything made from flour and water. A little tangent. The question of bagels. Can you say hamotzi over a bagel? The process of saying hamotzi is flour and water becomes dough, you bake it in the oven. A bagel, a true New York bagel, is boiled first before it's baked. Some say then you don't say hamotzi on a bagel because it's not the way bread is usually made, because you don't boil bread before baking it in the oven. So so there's a question for some, like if you're eating a plain bagel or a sesame bagel or a poppy seed bagel, plain bagel with the seeds on top, do you say hamotzi over it? I do, but there are some who don't because of the boiling that happened before it became, before the baking. So matzah that we eat on Passover, the plain matzah is hamotzi. It's just flour and water. But there's such a thing as egg matzah. Egg matzah is called matzah ashira, rich or enhanced matzah. It's now, that might seem to be an oxymoron. how can matzah be enriched? Matzah is matzah, it's disgusting. So you add apple juice to it or grape juice and eggs to it, it's still matzah. But in the category of whether you say hamotzi on it or not, you don't say hamotzi on egg matzah. Now, so now this leads to, so can't we just use matzah for Shabbos dinner and Shabbos lunch? The answer is no, because you're not supposed to eat matzah on the day of the Seder, because you're supposed to build up your appetite for the Seder. The one day a year that you're not supposed to eat matzah is this year, Friday night and all day Shabbat. So what could be a solution if your house is fully kosher for Passover is not a solution, because you're not allowed to eat the matzah, because you're supposed to build up your appetite for eating matzah for the first time at the Seder. So then what do you do if you don't want to have challah set aside and worry about the crumbs that you have to clean up, which you're not allowed to clean up on Shabbat? So according to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, as quoted by Rabbi Cass Abelson in that paper from the Conservative Movement Committee on Law and Standards from 1993, is that yes, in this case, egg matzah can be counted as you can say hamotzi over it, because you're using egg matzah to be the essential element of the meal, to make it a full meal. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says, you say hamotzi over egg matzah. And that's what you would do if you don't want to eat challah on Friday night and Shabbat this year. So that's what I have always done in my home, always eat egg matzah. But frankly, I wasn't up on all aspects of that teshuvah, and I did not say hamotzi over the egg matzah, because I never say hamotzi over egg matzah. You're not supposed to. In reading the teshuvah again, I was you have to read every page of a legal document, and lawyers who might be on or watching know what happens if you don't read everything in a legal document. You can be burned. So I didn't. In reading it again, it says clearly you say hamotzi for these particular meals when you're using egg matzah on this Shabbat that leads into Passover. So now there are still other Orthodox rabbis who do not follow Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's liberal opinion, and who will insist on eating challah on this particular Shabbat this year. But I follow Rabbi Cass Abelson, who quoted Moshe Feinstein, and that's what I will do this year. Could we say hamotzi over Passover rolls made with matzah meal? Yes, you could do that too. Yes, the Passover rolls that are purchased are not not hamotzi. Whatever ingredients are, that's in other words, like Shalom's or Moti's sells these Passover rolls. I'm almost positive that they are not counting as hamotzi. So therefore, you could use that instead of, you can use that because it looks like challah if you wanted to. You can use anything like that. It just, you can't use matzah. Matzah has to be reserved for the Seder. You can use anything else you want for the hamotzi prayer that has this form of bread. Okay. Any other questions or comments about that? I will say, while you're thinking of whether you have a question or a comment, is that Passover is like Shabbat in terms of the number of restrictions that there are that have to be followed. And when one is preparing for Passover, it seems as if there are more restrictions that you have to be sure to not transgress than there are positive things that you are doing in order to enhance, right? So in other words, if we're thinking about what it means to be a spiritual religious person, we might think that we want to do things to enhance our lives, that we want to add things into our spiritual repertoire in order to become more spiritual. We might not consider restrictions as this path to spiritual enhancement. And it makes it difficult, especially for the uninitiated or the newly initiated, to get to learn all of the Shabbat restrictions and all the Passover restrictions and to see them as positives. So I'll get to your question in a second, Margie. So that the following all these restrictions is very difficult. And I've been following these restrictions my entire life, right? So for 59 years, my parents followed the restrictions for me for some of those years. And I've been following the restrictions myself with my wife for most of those years. And I still have to check the Passover guide that comes out from the Rabbinical Assembly every year, which I teach about every year, to be reminded, does this need to have a Passover certification on it, kashrut certification or not, which we will get to really next time, are flax seeds and chia seeds Pesach. I have to check, Margie, and so
it's okay. I just
no. It's I believe so. Flax seeds. Flax is not one of those grains, so therefore it should be kosher for Passover. Chia is a plant. I think I only know that from, those chia pets that you can buy. So you spread this animal with the chia and sprouts are coming out of it.
You can make a pudding out of it.
Okay. So I don't think that should not be chametz. It's not, now, the question is, do chia seeds and flax seeds, do they grow in a pod? If they grow in a pod or like grow like a bean, if they are like beans, then they would be considered chametz for an Ashkenazi Jew, but would be considered kosher for Passover for a Sephardi Jew. So you'd have to look up to see what these flax seeds, because there's a question about mustard, for example. The mustard that is kosher for Passover is really fake mustard. And vanilla also, right? Vanilla for Passover, it's kind of like imitation vanilla, because vanilla is in a bean, and a bean are beans, and beans are kitniot in that category. So it depends then on these seeds. Are they, sesame seeds, for example? That's also kitniot. So now I'm raising more questions, and I haven't answered your question, Margie. So I don't know.
Okay, I just wondered because people use flax seeds like as an egg substitute. So I
flax seeds as an egg substitute. So again, I can't answer the question, Margie. I would have to Google flax seeds kosher for Passover, and then come up with a site that is reputable, like the OU or the OK. Or the CRC, the Chicago Rabbinic Council. Those three sites, or the Star-K. Any one of those four sites would have a quick answer to that question, and those answers would be reliable, because those are the four main ones that provide the kashrut certification in the country and would provide kosher for Passover certification as well. There's another question in the chat, and let me read this. Without eggs, how do you actually use beans? So in other words, Arnie, you will be eating kitniot, not eating kitniot. So you will be eating. So
yes,
right. So how do you keep kosher for Passover by eating beans when the kosher markets are usually run by, are certified by Ashkenazi rabbis? So that finding kosher certified kitniot for Passover is difficult. So I will say, Arnie, that I remember 7 Mile Market has a separate section in it for those who eat kitniot. So you can buy kosher for Passover hummus and tahina, objects like that. Otherwise, you're on your own for making these things yourself. And that would mean you would have to buy, let's say, chickpeas. If you buy chickpeas in a can, I would not do that for Passover because that's processed in some way and it could be processed with hummus. So even though the bean itself could be considered kosher for Passover, the fact that it's in a can means it's processed, and the process could include hummus. So you can buy dry chickpeas, you can buy dry lentil, dry peas, you can buy frozen peas. You can buy frozen peas, but not frozen cooked peas, and no canned peas or any other beans. Any other beans canned, you cannot buy. Even if it says 100%, no additives to it, just stay away from canned beans. Just do the dry, and you can make your own stuff from that. Rice, the same way. There are some people who will sift through the rice to make sure there aren't things added to it. That's only because it's a remnant from people who would buy rice in huge bags from the marketplace. And those huge bags sometimes would be next to barley or wheat. And that so some could be interspersed. The likelihood of wheat or barley ending up in the bag of 100% rice is slim to none. So you can buy a bag of rice, and that's totally fine. Not, again, but not minute rice or anything processed like that. Regular rice, 100% regular rice you can do, 100% beans, frozen or dry, but not canned.
And do you subscribe by the 2015 Teshuvah that's what
I personally do. I would eat it. I would definitely eat kitniot, but my wife is in charge of my house. And so she will not eat kitniot. So therefore, we do not have kitniot in our house.
Well, because one of the reasons that they gave in the Teshuvah was because it's more healthful.
Yes.
And it might be more saving of the environment.
Yes, no, I understand that.
So there's actual reasons for overturning the.
Yeah, and I totally am an advocate for Ashkenazi Jews eating kitniot. I was an advocate of it since rabbinical school days, because even before environmental vegetarianism, veganism became even as popular as it is today, Rabbi David Galinkin, my halacha teacher in Israel, 85, 86, that academic year, taught the origin of kitniot from the Middle Ages. And it's essentially Ashkenazim adding an extra layer of protection to make sure you're not eating something that looks like chametz. That's all it is. It's based on that simple extra protection layer. Sephardi rabbis are saying, you're ridiculous, Ashkenazi rabbis, for doing that, and there's no reason to do that. Ashkenazi rabbis said, you're right, Sephardi rabbis. We could eat the kitniot. We could eat the rice, but we're not going to, because we feel it's important to take this extra step. So that's what it's based on, taking an extra step. There's no reason to take the extra step. Now all we're doing is maintaining an Ashkenazi tradition of not eating kitniot, as opposed to the more healthy things that you could be advocating for, right? The only problem with the substitute soy is a bean, right? So soybean, edamame, you could eat on Passover, but tofu, you think you could eat on Passover. I think it's nearly impossible to buy tofu that hasn't been processed with hummus. So you can look for that, but if you can buy 100% tofu that has no chametz mixed into it, and you can be absolutely sure that it's 100% soy and no other additives to it, then you can buy that for Passover. But otherwise, it's going to have chametz in it, like soy sauce. Soy sauce definitely cannot be used on Passover because it's as chametzim.
Our
So-
plan was to buy dry beans, and like you said,
Yeah.
cook them, and that's that.
Make it from scratch is the easiest way with that, and you don't need the kashrut certification on it, right? If it's 100% dry bean, nothing else added to it, perfectly acceptable as kosher on Passover. Okay, we'll stop here for today. We will continue the discussion of cleaning our homes for Passover and other things about cleaning our homes for Passover and stuff like that next time. And then 2 weeks from today, we'll talk about the Seder. Have a good rest of the day, everybody.
Okay. Yasher Koach.
Yasher Koach.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
week,
Bye.
everyone.
You too.